Hey, my church, Pastor Jim here, and it is the last Sunday of the month. It's the last Sunday of the year. It's the last Sunday of 2021, and we're going to close it out by you and me spending someone else's money. You ready? Let's do it. Guys, I'm so excited because it is our third annual Bless Someone Weekend, where we do not meet in small groups, we do not meet in a large group, but instead you and your family get to go out and bless someone who probably doesn't expect it. We get to go out and be the church in our community wherever we are, no matter if we're traveling or if we're still here at home and have people visiting us. And I'm really excited because last year we were able to give everyone in our church $5 to spend, and some people matched it. Some people did some really incredible things. In fact, every story I've heard, people were blessing someone and had just amazing stories to tell. But this year, one of our anonymous donors, somebody who's a champion of our church, somebody who prays for our church, who prays for you, who prays for me, who heard about us doing our Bless Someone Weekend and decided that they wanted to match that $5. And so this year, you and me and our families have $10 to spend, $10 to bless somebody with. So let's talk about what that looks like. And to know what it looks like, first let's talk about why we're doing it. Well, you've heard me say it before, and you'll probably hear me say it again. I believe that if we are people who's trying our best to follow Jesus, then we should at least try to do what Jesus says to do. And one of those things that Jesus says to do, in fact, it's one thing, but really two things that are the most important, is for us to love God and love our neighbor. Now, you might hear that, love God, love your neighbor, and you might think to yourself, Jim, who is my neighbor? And if you just thought of that, realize that you are not the first person to ever ask that question. In fact, in the accounts of Jesus' life, there's a man that actually asked Jesus that very same question that maybe you just asked yourself. Who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells a story, and at the end of the story, the man who asked the question, after he hears the story, comes to the conclusion that your neighbor, at least according to Jesus, is the person who is in front of you. In other words, the person that you come in contact with, the person that maybe you see a need, maybe you feel this compelling urge to bless, that person is your neighbor. And Jesus calls us and invites us to love that person. And Jesus shows us what loving our neighbor looks like. There's so many accounts in the biographies written about Jesus' life, so many times where Jesus is walking to a town, and as he's going, he hears somebody or sees somebody that needs his help, that Jesus himself is able to help. And maybe it's somebody that has a skin ailment, maybe it's somebody that's paralyzed, maybe it's somebody who's blind, and Jesus stops what he's doing, he stops walking, and instead walks towards that person and heals them. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, of course he does, right? He's Jesus. That's what Jesus does. But what does this mean for me? But see, the early church, the early Christians, the early followers of Jesus looked at Jesus' example of loving their neighbor and said, we can do that too. And there's a church planner named Paul that gives a great example of what it looks like for somebody who's like you and me, that's not Jesus, how we can use our gifts to bless someone, to help and love the person right in front of us. Let's read what Paul wrote. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. Paul was a Roman citizen, which back then was a big deal. See, if you were a Roman citizen like Paul, you had privileges. You had rights that most people at that time didn't. But Paul didn't use those rights or use those privileges to help people from afar. Instead, Paul makes it personal. And he gets this idea of helping the weak by becoming weak from Jesus. I mean, if we think about it, Jesus, in all his majesty and all his power, with all his abilities, lowers himself and comes down, and that's what we celebrate at Christmas, that Jesus comes down and lives with us. Not just for a moment, but he starts out as a child, as a baby. And he lives for about 33 years with people who are weaker than him. And during that time, he he cries with them. During that time, he mourns with people. During that time, he had bumps and bruises along the way and experienced things that you and I experience too. And so Paul is saying here that you and I, when we want to love our neighbor, when Jesus calls us to love our neighbor, is to make it personal. To not love our neighbor from afar and say, hey, they're over there, but to actually maybe even say, sit in the ditch with our neighbor. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like maybe what Jesus did. Sacrificing our time, actually thinking of what is the best thing for my neighbor, what is the best thing I can do to help my neighbor. And so as you think about what you and your family are going to do with the $10 you have, maybe you decide we want to combine it to do something big for someone. Maybe we want to match it to do even more if you can. But what I would say, guys, is do something that actually takes some time, actually takes some thought, actually takes some sacrifice, and make it personal. You know, it's great to pay for somebody's drink in a Starbucks line. And that's really, really great. But if you see somebody that's struggling, if you see somebody that maybe you can bless on the side of the road, instead of giving them money, ask them, hey, what can I go get you from Walmart? You might be surprised at what they said they really need. A pair of socks can be more meaningful and more beneficial than a gift card to McDonald's, depending on what that person's need is. But whatever it is, my guess and my hope would be that you want to pray about it. Pray about it with you and your kids and get the whole family involved with it. And whatever God invites you to do, whoever God puts in your path, whoever that neighbor is, love them. Love them as a follower of Jesus. Love them because they are a chosen person from God. They are somebody who God loves too. All right, guys, have a great new year. I look forward to celebrating with you in the new year. And before you go, I want to tell you about our new series we're kicking off in our small groups. It is the Beginner's Guide to Predicting Your Future. I mean, we have a whole new year ahead of us, so why not start out with some helpful tips of how you and I can have an even better year than last year. All right, guys, I love you. I'm so thankful that I get to be part of your church, that together we can help outshine the darkness in other people's lives. Let's do it.